There's a ride in Fantasyland that, even though it opened in 1955 and has been around ever since, it would be unrecognizable if you went back in time because of all the changes it has been through. Want to know which one? Stick with us and find out. Hello, I'm Parker, your Fastpass Facts host, and I'm here to tell you all about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride and how it changed throughout the years. So let's go merrily on our way back to 1955 when the ride first opened. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was originally planned to be a roller coaster, but because Walt only wanted attractions that were appropriate for all ages, it became a dark ride instead. So the ride was built and it opened in time for Disneyland's opening in 1955. The ride was loosely based on the 1949 Disney's animated film, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And we say loosely because, as many of you know, Imagineers didn't create the ride to tell us the story. Instead, they created a genuine wild ride that takes us crazily through many scenes and places, most of which don't appear in the movie or even the original novel by Kenneth Grahame. This is a much better formula than trying to recreate a movie inside a 2-minute dark ride. It is much better to take the main or most interesting experience from the movie and use it to create a whole new story or experience. Like in Peter Pan's flight where, instead of reliving the movie, we get to fly above London and Neverland. But back to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. The attraction did open in 1955. But the original version was completely changed in 1982 when the Fantasyland renovation started. The tracks were completely ripped up, the interior got an extreme makeover, and even the whole facade was torn off and changed from a tournament tent style to the glorious Toad Hall we all know and love. And this new one-of-a-kind ride takes us to lots of places, from the inside of Toad's Hall to Winky's Pub. But definitely, the most controversial scene in all the ride, and maybe every ride in Disney parks, is the one that takes us to hell. That's right, after crashing into a train, we find ourselves in a heated room with small devils bouncing up and down. We also see the judge from the courtroom scene as a demon, and an even towering green dragon that attempts to burn us. But thankfully, we get to escape and go back to the unloading area. This ride was not only one of Disneyland's originals, but also Disney World's too. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride opened in the Magic Kingdom on October 1st, 1971. This wild ride was an updated version of the one back in Disneyland. It was designed to have a greater capacity, having 2 rows of seats instead of 1 and 2 complete tracks that provided a complete different story one from the other. Here's a comparison of both tracks. As you can see, both tracks started going into Toad Hall. The right track then took guests inside Toad's trophy room, while the left track took them through Toad Library. Next, the right track stayed inside Toad Hall and went into the kitchen, while the left track went out to a barnyard. After that scene, the right track finally took guests out of Toad Hall into a gypsy camp, while the left track stayed in the barnyard, almost running over many animals. Then both tracks came together into the central plaza. The right track went right into Winky's Tavern, while the left track went into the courtroom. After Winky's Tavern, right track guests went to pay a visit to Ratty's house, while the left track guests went to jail. Both tracks went into the Shireland, where they crashed into a train. And then, of course, they went to the Hell scene. This ride was a great success, just like the Disneyland one, but Disney executives noticed that the building was pretty big. In fact, it was big enough to have a ride and a souvenir shop inside, so they made a big decision. They decided to close Mr. Toad's Wild Ride to make way for the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Of course, hardcore Mr. Toad's fans were not happy with this decision. A University of Miami student even started a Save Toad website where he included the addresses and names of the Disney executives for people to complain about this change. They even held protests inside the park where supporters wore Save Toad t-shirts. This campaign was pretty big, and it also got a lot of media coverage, but as we all know, Not all reporters understand there's a big difference between Disneyland and Disney World, and so many newspapers and TV studios reported the 1998 closing of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. Sadly, this campaign did not help, and Mr. Toad's last day of operation was September 7, 1998. But thankfully, we can still find this ride in Disneyland. We can also find Toad Hall in Storybook Land Canals, but not in its original position. Originally, Toad Hall had one of the most prominent locations of the ride, but in 1994, 2 years after Aladdin came out, Toad Hall was replaced by the Sultan's Palace and the Marketplace of Agrabah, and Toad Hall disappeared. But thankfully not forever, because it returned in 1995 in a new spot right after Cinderella's French countryside village. Disneyland Paris also has its very own Toad Hall. It may not be a ride, but it's still amazing. This restaurant takes us inside Toad Hall's many rooms, including the entrance hall, library, kitchen, game room, the drawing room, and the greenhouse or winter garden. Imagineers thought of adding Toad Hall to Fantasyland because they thought it would solidify it. After all, Fantasyland depicts many tales from Great Britain. To finish up, we wanted to share with you 5 facts you need to know about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Disneyland. The ride vehicles are named after characters from the original novel and movie. These characters are Toady, Badger, Squirrel, Molly, Ratty, Weasel, and Winky. There's actually one scene with each of the characters from the car names except Ratty. Mr. Toad in works of art and as a statue in the town square. Mole in the pub eating fried chicken. Badger on a ladder in the library. Squirrel holding up Toad in the center of town. Weasel on the chandeliers in the hall after the leaded glass window. Winky in the pub spinning the beers. And speaking of Mr. Winky's Tavern, this scene was recycled from the Florida version and taken to Disneyland after the revamped 1983 version. While inside the attraction in the Village Room, look at the second-story window of the Constabulary Police Station, and you will occasionally see the silhouette of Sherlock Holmes, deerstalker hat and pipe included. This may be a special nod to Basil Rathbone, one of the most famous Sherlock Holmes. But why is he featured in Mr. Toad's Wild Ride? Well, Basil Rathbone narrated The Wind in the Willows in the 1949 Disney film. He even mentions Sherlock Holmes at the beginning of the film. Supposedly, the hell scene is called the Inferno Room, so there's no mention of hell when talking about it. As we enter Toad Hall, we can see Mr. Toad's family crest, which was a special motto that reads, Toady acceleratio semper absurda. This means speeding with Toad is always absurd. And as we can see, after being on the ride, it totally is. Have you watched The Wind in the Willows? If so, what do you think of the changes from the movie to the ride? What about the hell scene? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you would like to talk to us about this or any other Disney theme, join our Discord server. And don't forget to add your suggestions. We'll leave an invite in the description.